And we see modern brands just continue to shift, or trying to come to market with different messages, different positionings, different promises, different stories that they're trying to tell. And there's this, if you're a consumer, how do you know what that brand is standing for or that business is standing for when they're just trying to optimize sales?
And the masters of credibility.
So here we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masters of Credibility. My guest today is the wonderful Matt Herbert, who is co-founder and co-CEO of Tracksuit. Now, for those of you who don't know Tracksuit are a relatively new brand tracking software organization, and they do brand tracking at a fraction of the cost of what is actually quite an expensive thing for brands to do in general. And they do it in a much more beautiful way. A nice UI that helps you learn more from your data. And I want to get into it with Matt to talk about credibility today and the concept of brand credibility. And I think understanding your audience and what they think of you is a vital part of that. Hence, we inviting Matt on. So, Matt, if you could just justify your invite by telling us a bit about yourself, why you know your stuff, you're before Tracksuit, and then, tell us a bit about starting Tracksuit, how that came about, and what you're trying to achieve in the industry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks, Rob, and great to be here. I think, firstly, at Tracksuit, as you've said, yes, we provide beautiful, affordable, always-on brand tracking, which the aim is to, fuel marketing success for modern consumer brands through actionable insights. And so, as we're founding Tracksuit, and what our vision is to ultimately have that brand data on the agenda at every boardroom. After all, what's measured gets managed, and so whether you're a CFO or a CMO or a chief strategy or on the agency side, we're offering simple and clear answers as to whether your marketing and brand building is working. And ultimately, I think this comes down to, simplicity is a superpower. And so the simple truths allowing brands to scale and brand tracking, offering that long-term business growth. So that's a little bit about what we're doing here at Tracksuit.
But where I'm sitting, it looks like it's going really well. You are, you're in New York right now, right? But like last time I spoke to you, in London, having recently opened a London office. So are you opening a New York office that I don't know about? What's going on?
Yeah, so on the roads, we are very much a challenger brand in the brand tracking space. Founded 3.5 years ago out of New Zealand, and then following strong demand from our customer and our agency partners. So yes, we do have a recently launched London presence. So we've got 10 of us in a London office in Shoreditch, as well as 10 over here in New York, which is where I'm spending my time. So offices, London, New York, Sydney, and Auckland. Both myself and my co-founder, Connor, we've worked in brand and marketing adjacent roles over our career. And that's where, over our time in our career, we'd noticed, in terms of marketing and brand, we'd noticed that it was been incredibly easy to convince stakeholders to invest in bottom of the funnel performance marketing, sales and conversion activity. But what we're looking at, is at the expense of that longer term brand play. And so myself and Connor, with our brand backgrounds, linked up with a effectiveness leader, James Herman, and fellow Kiwi, as well as independent insights consultancy, TRA. And it was all around, okay, how do we build a tool and a platform that showcases the top of funnel? What gets measured, gets managed. How do we build something that puts visibility into top of funnel, full funnel marketing that can sit alongside performance marketing and conversions, and ultimately do the job of brands and performance, the long and the short, future demand, existing demand, all these concepts that are now starting to come into the forefront, which is brilliant to be a part of and leading. And how do we build and how do we support brand building for sustainable, future-proof business over time? So the UK office, absolutely. So we've got Dan and Leanne running our London office out of Shoreditch. And that's all around how do we support best modern UK brands and their agency partners to drive that common language around brand and the importance of it.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about some of those brands that you've been working with shortly. Let's talk about the concept of brand credibility. I'm particularly interested in the fact that you track full funnel, because I think that one of the places that brands can build a lot of credibility is in that mid funnel, which is traditionally one of the hardest areas to track. I was talking to some people who are attacking this problem from the other direction, from the bottom up, with an analytics tool that's grown out of that performance marketing space to do AI journey stitching so that we can see what's going on in mid-funnel more. I think I've told you about those guys. Yeah, very, very interesting. So to you, like, what does the concept of brand credibility mean to you in the first place? How important is it?
There's a couple of ways to look at that. When I prepping for this and the work that you're doing at Nonsense around the pillars of credibility, and I think I really like the way that you put that around credibility, brand promises, and brand promises equals trust. And so when we're looking at brand credibility and what it means to us at Tracksuit, I think we view marketing has two jobs to be done. One is harvest your existing demand, and the second piece is to build future demand. And so existing demand, there's 5 to 15% of people who are ready to buy from you right now. And so how are you positioned with a credible brand and promise that you are going to do what people need you to do when they're buying from you? So there are, category entry points. So why do people come into a category? What are they looking for? There are real functional and rational reasons that as a brand you need to really own. And so how well are you owning the functional and rational pieces that build trust, that ultimately would, drive sales, and that's part of brand credibility. The second part, building future demands. And so that's all around building familiarity and emotional closeness and trust with buyers who will come into the category in the near future. And that represents 95 to 80% of your total, addressable market or consumer base. So then when looking at that, if you're building your future demands, what do you need to be and how do you need to show up to build a familiarity and emotional closeness so that you are more likely to see those customers buy from you in the future? And so at Tracksuit, what credibility is, there are a couple of ways to looking at what do you need to own as a brand and as a credible brand. So what category are you in? There are going to be category entry points. And so how do you make sure that your brand is credible and promises to why people are buying from the category that you're in? Then there are also the drivers of the funnel. So drivers of consideration, drivers of brand preference, drivers of, trust, if you're looking at that. So how and in what way is your brand positioned to own why a consumer would prefer you or why would a consumer consider you? And then it's looking at the competitors. What are the competitors owning? And then looking for that white space for your brands so that you can make those simple, clear promises that are relevant to you, but are distinctive and differentiated at a category level, at a competitor level, and you're showing up for who your brand needs to be, which means that you're for some people and not for others. And I think that's the great thing about the brand and credibility. What do people think and feel about you? How are you owning that? And ultimately, how are you measuring that to get that right from the start? So informing your strategy, iterating your strategy, but leaning into all those various aspects of what credibility. There's a big old waffle there, which we might cut out.
It's a broad question. I think, especially the top of that funnel, the idea of becoming known for a particular promise, and we'll talk about delivering on it later, because I think that's for me the essence of building brand credibility. It's making and then keeping promises. But in terms of making a promise that actually resonates with people, you need to be able to track that. Are people even aware of the promise you're making, and what are you getting the associations that you're trying to create? And I love that Tracksuit allows me to track those associations. I can see, say, if I'm one of our clients, AXA, big insurer, they say their healthcare brand, AXA Health, they might want to be associated with being real experts in health. So if the word experts or expertise is coming up in unprompted awareness tracking, then you can start to see that we're doing a good job of the thing that we're trying to do if our promise is around being the biggest experts in the space.
So brand promise or brand associations or brand attributes, every brand has brand pillars or brand promises, all those key pieces there. It's really easy to know internally at the brands what your brand pillars are or what your brand promises are, but there's no better way to audit whether you are holding true to those brand promises or your attributes than actually going out and getting an objective read of the market. And that's what we're doing every single week for our brands, for our agency partners, for our clients, is getting that objective read of potential consumers. What do they think and feel about the brands and the competitor sets? And then does that line up to your brand promise or your brand pillars? Because otherwise you're listening to the echo chamber of we're living and breathing our brands, you're living and breathing, nonsense your clients are living and breathing. Yeah, but that's an echo chamber. And so getting out, getting that objective and then lining that back up to, are our brand promises coming through? If they are, fantastic. If they're not, great. There's a job to be done that leans into that credibility play.
Yeah. And I think I've seen, we do a lot of brand strategy work as well and repositioning brands. And some of the time you really want to make sure that you're not repositioning something on the assumption that you're already known for a thing. And then because businesses can convince themselves that, all right, we're already known for this. So the next chapter in the story is to start talking about this. But if that bit's not true, if you're not already known for the thing that have all drank the Kool-Aid and said that you're known for, you're in real trouble there because you haven't achieved much and then you're going to try and start from scratch somewhere else. So I think it's vital. So this idea of making meaningful promises in market, I think is something we should explore a little bit. Which brands do you see out there in the world today that you think make truly meaningful promises?
The one that's really captured my attention and what we've seen in our own data is around Dr. Pepper in the soda category in the US. And our friends over at System 1, Andrew Tyndall, gathered a whole lot of data from market share data, brand tracking data, System 1 testing, all around how has Dr. Pepper over 139 years remains relevant, but also now in a position in 2024 where they have, second place market share in the soda category, just behind Coca-Cola, but overtaking Pepsi and Sprite and Diet Coke. And so when it comes to brand promises, there's probably a few pieces that come into the Dr. Pepper story that we could dive into.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They're a really interesting brand because their kind of DNA is like, we bring the weird, right? We do like a little bit of something different, which is sort of ideally placed for becoming number 2 in market because Coke is so ubiquitous, right? And we all know what it tastes like. Whereas Dr. Pepper is just that one for the other one, the other thing. And I think that's quite interesting.
Well, I mean, you've hit on one of those right now for Dr. Pepper, and that's different. There are 3 brand positionings or 3 associations that they have done right from day one, and that's different, pepper, and high flavor. And they have hammered that home for 139 years. And that consistent positioning. And I personally, I've drunk Dr. Pepper once or twice. I mean, we're talking just before. You and I don't truly know the depth of, I wouldn't say we're super fans of Dr. Pepper, but we know that Dr. Pepper is all around being different. And we said that, and we're able to say that straight away.
I got a little bit addicted to it at university, but I had to give up for health reasons. But yeah, it's a great brand, and it does different so well in all those different guises that it's done it under. I think that's a really nice example. So in terms of how brands track their performance in this, in this space, they're out there to make promises. How's that broken at the moment, in terms of how you see the industry? Because clearly you've started Tracksuit to solve a particular problem. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Even in your piece around the 6 pillars of credibility and the great article, I think you said, brands are desperate for our attention and they continue to focus on winning at all costs. And there's no better way that we saw that summed up by the allure and the addiction of performance and conversion marketing at all costs. And that's around, there's been, the 15 to 20 year, the past 15 years or so around this constant A/B testing, changing, optimizing the bottom of the funnel. And we see modern brands just continue to shift, or trying to come to market with different messages, different positionings, different promises, different stories that they're trying to tell. And there's this, if you're a consumer, how do you know what that brand is standing for or that business is standing for when they're just trying to optimize sales? And so desperate for our attention and continuing to focus on winning at all costs. That's what we wanted to change. That's why we exist and what we wanted to change with getting Tracksuit into more hands and democratizing the access to brand tracking and insights is to say, what are you for? What are you not going to be for? And how do you continue to track what people think and feel about your brand, your positioning against competitors? What's the category doing? And that's around that, that full funnel. And so if your brand needs to be considered, what's driving consideration? If the job now is to be the most preferred brand, what's driving preference? To the Dr. Pepper example of what we've seen is in the soda category, one of the biggest drivers from consideration to preference is around being for people like me. And so do consumers think that your brand is for people like them? And that's all around relevance, right? And so one of the insights that we're able to see with Dr. Pepper is looking at, Dr. Pepper for that 18 to 34-year-old demographic, they are most known for being a brand that is for people like me, or being the most relevant brand to 18 to 34-year-olds. And they're just below Coca-Cola at a national level. And so it's that type of insight that is forming the strategy about who they're for, who they're not for. That's the type of tracking that we, and the insight and the actionable insight that we wanted to get out with Tracksuit. What do people think and feel around those key positionings?
I think your first point there about the influence of performance marketing becoming so strong that it teaches a whole generation of marketers that the way to do this is to test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. Now, I'm a big believer in testing and learn. The reality is you're doing that with a relatively small audience. Nobody can afford to test and learn through mass channel. And that would exacerbate the problem that you mentioned, which is you create confusion in market. What does this brand really stand for? If you did it, you don't really see anybody test and learning on TVC. So I'm all for a bit of test and learn, do some YouTube stuff, do some social stuff, see what people really resonate with, and then roll it out. But because the go-to-market cost of brand tracking has been so expensive historically, only really the big boys can even justify getting involved, even though the media cost, or at least the cost to get in market in broadcast mediums, has dropped a lot. So like if you think like the cost of getting on broadcast pod compared to getting on TV in the last 20 years has come right down. But then you've got suddenly brand tracking becomes a prohibitive factor. Because if I've got to spend 200k a year on just tracking the effectiveness of the campaign, I better be spending upwards of a couple of million quid on doing the campaign. Otherwise, my measurement cost is stupidly prohibitive. So I think in a way, the other thing that you're doing is just opening up doing brand stuff to a smaller size of company, right? Like a company that already has new media options available to it, but like the cost of making that content's come down as well. So it was almost the last piece that needed to come down to make it worth me as a small brand trying a bit of telly, trying a bit of outdoor.
And that's why we say, there's power and simplicity of what gets measured, gets managed, and absolutely measure the bottom of the funnel, the sales and the conversions, but also let's start to measure the brand building, that top of funnel, that full funnel. How do you make people aware of you? How do you make people consider your brand? Why do people going to prefer you? And that's what we wanted to say with building Tracksuit is how do we democratize that access that has been reserved for enterprise level multinational brands that can afford, the hundreds of thousands to do consistent, always on tracking, and say, let's take the fundamental, essential metrics and questions to provide the actionable insights for marketers, their agency partners, to get that at the board level at the same time as being cost effective to free up the budgets available to create the campaigns, to test the right areas, but it's free up the budget to do more marketing and more brand building and not take up all the budgets to measure. You need to be doing both. So what gets measured gets managed, but also free that budget to actually do activity that's driving the business forward.
Yeah, and I think the other thing it does to sing your praise is now that the cost of measuring brand tracker type data is small, it's much smaller. Like what you get, like a tenth of the cost, like roughly speaking, according to your website. The thing that I think is really interesting there is, okay, I read that case study about Wilson London, the guys who made the detergent. They use the lovely natural botanical ingredients and stuff in that. But they can't afford to do TVC and stuff, but they still need to be a brand forward brand because they are, it's not a bottom of funnel, scrappy purchase. It's a super premium detergent product. So they've got to go down the brand marketing route. Their equivalent of that is obviously to go big on experiential, turn up at interesting events, do stuff like that. And that is not really measurable with a traditional 200k a year brand tracker because it would just bump the cost of me doing that into orbit and I wouldn't, bother. So, but now they're in a position where they can actually measure, even within a tight range of just Greater London, they can measure the effectiveness at brand level of doing that stuff. And so that's really interesting, because now you're going, suddenly agencies that were always considered, or media that were considered bottom of funnel. If you think sampling and experiential is considered like, oh, what people do, right? They're at the music festival and they try that and then they walk around the corner and go buy it from the shop. It's not what happens. Everyone knows it's a brand thing, right? Like I have, and then maybe it lodges in the back of my head, and it'll be 6 months later, but I had a brilliant experience when I tried that product there. I'll pick some up. Now that's measurable, which, that's great. We're finally joining some dots, which probably most marketers have always felt in their gut were right, but you could improve.
To that point there, and that's who we're really for here at Tracksuit, is those senior brand marketers who have had experience at a L'Oreal, for example. So your point there about Wilton London. Anna Simon came across as an ex-L'Oreal executive that joined Sam and Mike at Wilton London and brought that big brand strategy, big brand experience to a challenger brand in the detergents and laundry space. But the fundamentals were right, is around, we need to build a long-term, we need to build into the brand play. We need to do that. But if you are ex-L'Oreal or the team at Moju, Ginger Shots and the functional shots, they've all, come out of Danone. And so the same, you move from, Anna Simon moves from ex-L'Oreal to Wilton London, brings that brand experience in. The team over at Moju come from Danone into Moju, the challenger functional shots, and you've seen what Moju's been able to do with that consistency of messaging, that distinctiveness, the growth that Moju's been on. That's who we're really for, is you've come from big business, enterprise.
Yeah, and I know a bunch of those brands as well. We just pitch for like a challenge brand in the personal banking space, right? And same thing, people potentially coming from big brands to work there, or from other techie startup places. And then you have this interesting culture there where it's this clash of like brand people with performance marketers. And there is a really nice way of stitching all of this stuff together if you have the data and the culture to do it. I think creatively you need to stitch that stuff through as well, which is where we love to help. Because from our point of view, like, well, okay, this stuff doesn't all have to be matching luggage in the old school idea of integration. We just the left hand just needs to know and respect what the right hand is doing. And I wonder if, like there's quite a lot of these startups, regardless of vertical, say you're Monzo or you're, that wasn't who we pitched for, by the way. But say you're Monzo or you're, or Wilton, right? In the detergent space. And what tends to happen for those brands is they grow to a certain size, largely fueled by performance marketing, and then plateau a bit and either get bought or don't, right? And that's the life cycle of that brand. And that might be quite a good exit strategy, actually, if you're the owner of it and you want to cash out. But like, actually, if you can get past that glass ceiling, which I would say requires brand building, then you're into a completely different space. Now you're getting past, well done startup to like starting to be a proper sized brand and going global and all of that stuff, which I think will be interesting to see what this injection of skills that you're helping provide does to the ability of brands to go really stratospheric from nothing, as opposed to, just wait for Unilever to buy me or whatever.
All brands start from somewhere. All businesses start from somewhere. All brands have to start from somewhere. And what I think is really important to get across in what you're saying is it's no longer performance marketing versus brand marketing. We know that brands impacts the effectiveness of your performance marketing, your sales and conversions. We've proved that out a number of times. The better that you're building your brand and your awareness and your consideration, the more effective your digital ads. And you can also build brands on digital platforms right now. You see advertising on digital platforms. It's either, it can be brand building or it can be sales focused. You can also do that with billboards. You can also do that with connected TV. So it's not necessarily the channel right now, but it's that understanding and what's the job that we're trying to do. And that's the board level, that's the execs, that's the brand team with the performance teams. Because at the end of the day, it's the insights around the category, it's the insights on your competitors, it's the insights on your own brands. And it's being really focused on the strategy, your positioning, what you want to be known for, the promises that you're making, the stories that you're telling, all roll up into a what is your brands? Who do you want to be known for, and why? That starts from day one, and it continues to iterate the bigger and the larger in the direction that you're taking. But it's those fundamentals that I am really excited that we're starting to see more and more in these conversations at different size levels of businesses.
I really like it. And we'll get on to, you mentioned storytelling. We'll get on to that because that's the second thing I wanted to talk to you about. But I think there's another point in there. You mentioned digital and social ads, right? And using them for brand building, which again is one of those things that every marketer has probably suspected is, can we build a brand entirely on social? Okay, what metrics have I got available? Engagement metrics. Can we pretend engagement metrics are a proxy for brand building? And it's the reason Meta launched the Uplift Studies product, because it's like, okay, we can do brand uplift now. Okay, because actually the truth is the natural metrics you get out of social media are all performance marketing-esque metrics. So, I hope that more ubiquitous brand tracking across the board also allows us to stop pigeonholing certain types of media into the performance bucket, especially video on social, which has a massive role to play from a brand point of view. But unless you've been doing that at mega volume with a big brand tracker, you couldn't ever do, which I'm sure, we've seen the likes of the Unilevers do, but it's going to be interesting that now that's open to more brands and see how they do it.
I think on the metrics and the reliance on looking at vanity versus business metrics, especially with social, if we reach, 2 million impressions, okay, what does 2 million impressions mean? That's a proxy for how many people saw it, or how many people might have seen it or might have been influenced. Okay, then what are we trying to understand? We're trying to understand, okay, how many people actually know about us? How many people, what is the consideration or what is the preference? And so, those impressions or CPMs or whatever if you're not in the marketing world, if you're trying to communicate that to your CFO, if you're trying to communicate that to your accounts team, that's this common language that we're trying to, show up and champion as a common language to measure and understand the value of brands. And moving from impressions to, okay, well, what's the actual business impact for this in terms of real people and consumers we're trying to influence?
Yeah, I mean, I've got in the early years of nonsense, we were like out and out social media for a few years when we first started. I was 25 years old. No one was going to give us any money unless it was for social media, because we were the young, cool guys and we could, do that shit. And I think I was certainly guilty of like putting massive impressions numbers on slides at the ends of campaigns. But what you learn is that, well, first of all, it's just a function of media spend anyway, right? So like it's got nothing to do with the quality of the strategy and the creative we did. So already I'm onto a loser. But like, second of all, it doesn't present upwards, because if you show it to a CFO, they go, well, how do we double that? And you say, give me double the budget then. And they're like, well, you'll get me zero efficiency for a doubling of my budget. I bet we can find a better way to spend that money. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think it's going to be really, really exciting. And let's talk about storytelling. We'll move on slightly. As you know, one of our little pillars of brand credibility is authentic storytelling. And it's this idea that, brands need to tell their stories from a place of truth and recount them honestly and authentically over time. Not because they have a moral duty to do so, but because they're the brands that we see do that are the ones that go on to have longer term success. Because each of those stories is an opportunity to build that bit more trust. And that's why we're into measuring customer lifetime value as an agency, because if you're measuring that and measuring how many of your stories have been consumed by your customer base or even prospects, you can see the relationship between the deeper they are into your story, the more they trust you. And that's why we're big on comms planning as well, because you need to be able to sort of stitch those stories into, some kind of loose narrative over time, particularly if, you're following somebody down through the funnel and into becoming a long-term customer. And so I'm interested in your views on how brand tracking can help brands with their storytelling. And I think specifically, the bits of your products in terms of tracking the consideration aspects of things, and also that association with keywords. Like how deep can we go with this? If I really wanted my brand to be seen as funny, and we set ourselves that goal, how would you help me do it?
Yeah, so storytelling and authentic storytelling is a piece that gets thrown around a lot. And I think if we go that next layer, what is the intention of authentic storytelling? And that's about eliciting emotion. And what does emotion do? Emotion leaves people feeling something. It builds trust. Feelings of why am I for this brand or not for this brand? So if we look at storytelling as about eliciting emotion, and that plays into long-term brand building. the more that we can build familiarity and emotional closeness and tell that story about who we are as a brand and why and how that's relevant to the consumer. That's why with brand tracking, we're measuring what do people think and feel about these brands ongoing every single week to understand what story should we be telling. And if we're looking at, from full funnel marketing, the storytelling and the emotion that drives into, okay, we have a consideration job to be done. Lots of people know about our brands, but less people are considering us. And so with brand tracking, you can dive into why are people not considering us? Or why and what associations and perceptions are our competitors leading on consideration? And so to the Dr. Pepper piece, Dr. Pepper and then the soda categories, we know that to drive consumers from consideration to preference is all around relevance and for people like themselves. So do they see what? Okay. So if we need to drive relevance, how are we driving relevance in a unique, authentic, distinctive way for our brand compared to our competitors? And how do we track that? And so that's where you start. What stories do we need to tell that roll up into the brand pillars, that roll up into why people prefer a brand? And that's the role of brand tracking within storytelling.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Straight away, if you tell a bunch of, very top people at nonsense, right? Like it's about people like me. You're going to go, well, okay, there's a ton we can do with that in terms of visuals and voice. Tonally, where are we at? How do we talk to these people in a way that makes them feel seen, makes them feel heard? And then the content strategy behind that. What stories are you telling? What scenarios are you setting ads in? I think it's a really interesting example because it's very FMCG and it's brown sugar water. It's the same as Coca-Cola because that's also brown sugar water. Obviously, they taste very different, but the brand is everything. I recently bought, actually, I can't remember what it's called something like Professor Preppy or something. It's like Aldi's rip-off Dr. Pepper. And it's called something like that. And just because I was like, I'll try that. They've got it in the zero. I'm pretty sure it tastes very similar, but I know that there's no Dr. Pepperness with it, right? And it feels like a letdown when I have some. And it's amazing the power of brand to be able to do that. Yeah, I feel like if you're going, okay, well, I needed to feel for people like me, then now I need to understand that culture more. Right, so there's a strategic hook there. I need to understand the culture of these young people more and work out how I can tell stories in their world instead of in our brand world.
I'm going to bring up another example around that really hammers this home, and this is around authentic storytelling, is around eliciting emotion, and that builds trust. And so the question is, as a brand, what stories do we need to be telling? And all stories need to roll up to the overall who's your brand for, and that's brand strategy, and that's the work that you're phenomenal at with helping out, is around what should our brand be known for, why. And so looking at with brand tracking and what we can help provide is around the category insights. Why are people entering the category? Why do people open up or take out insurance? Why do people open up bank accounts? Why do people buy soft drinks? What are the drivers of that? Okay, as a brand, are we owning those entry points around why people would even buy the category that we're playing in? And then what we can look at with brand tracking is around the drivers of the funnel. And so what drives brand consideration? What drives brand preference? What drives people to prefer one brand or another? And then from within that, then going to what are the brand associations or attributes that people are talking about? And is that aligned with what we want to be known as a brand or what we're putting out there into the market? And so if we have a look at the personal banking, you've got everything from the high street, Barclays, through to, new Starlings and Monzos, Revolutes. There's a whole lot of challenges that are coming into the market. What we know and what we can see from our brand tracking and from our insights is the impacts on converting people from awareness to consideration in personal banking. The two biggest drivers, it's for people like me. So are you a bank that people think is for them, their friends, their family, whatever their community is? And is also, as a brand I trust. And so is there a brand trust? Storytelling, emotions, trust. And we know that trust is really important. It was the second most important thing from awareness to consideration. If you look at in personal banking, why do people prefer one brand? So what drives from, I consider these brands or these banks, but this is my most preferred bank. Is a brand I trust is the most important driver. And so what stories are you telling that elicit the emotions of driving trust if you are a bank in that category. What we can see that ranks on the lowest drivers around preference is innovative. And so while innovative might be something that makes people aware or consider, in terms of preference, innovation doesn't really register. And so, okay, if we are a brand or a client, what stories do we need to tell that elicits trust? And if we're doing that job and we can say, okay, great, these demographics or customer segments, we're really strong here in terms of brand I trust, well, then with brand tracking, you can dive into of those people that say they trust this brand, what are the unprompted associations? So we'd ask a question like, what comes to mind when you think of Monzo? What comes to mind when you think of Starling? What comes to mind when you think of Barclays? It's open-ended, it's verbatim, and you start to see the unprompted attributes and word associations and verbatims coming through. How does that line up with trust? How does that line up with what we want to be known as? And then ultimately, track that and use that to inform the marketing, the communications, and ultimately the business impact that you're able to drive off the back of storytelling.
It's a great example because as a category, to be brutally honest about it, you can kind of separate all the brands into ones that are long-term established brands and then ones that are just tech innovators. And, I think maybe that's unfair on Starling, right? Who are looking to probably, be the first to properly bridge that gap globally. It'd be really interesting. So you're saying I can dig into why people love Barclays, right? So I can get unprompted word association with why people love Barclays. And that might be the length of time they've been established or the fact that they have experts working for them. Anything that is if I ask the question, why do you trust this brand? What unprompted stuff do I get out?
You've been in the UK a lot longer than I've been in the UK, but what are some of those emotional reasonings why someone might choose or talk about a Barclays? Like, yes, there's trust, there's innovation, there's customer service, there's all the functional people. But if you look at the high street banks that have been around for hundreds of years, what are some of those to you? What are some of those kind of more emotional storytelling pieces that you can think of?
I think they've all done quite a good job of resonating with community, and they've all done a very good job of getting in on family life stage. So they understand life stage really, which you don't see many of the tech brands doing in the banking space. So for example, Lloyds have done an advert with a black horse in it at pretty much every stage of life, right? A black horse looking over a crib. Oh, right. It's the new baby moment. A black horse running past a for sale sign. Oh, it's that moment you buy the new house. They know. And they, the black horse is an amazing symbol of we're with you every step of the way. We've got you back, right? Like a sort of, like a weird silent Gandalf horse that's got you back in every life situation, right? Like it's brilliant brand device. And I think that they've been very consistent about making it about life stage, right? And in a way that, if we're honest, your Chips, your Monzos, your Starlings and stuff, they've done performance marketing that's worked particularly well with, I would say, elder millennials and down in terms of age. And they've got me into it from a tech point of view. It's about ease. It's my busy lifestyle. I need to do that. But that's way less relevant when you've got 2 kids, a mortgage and an estate car full of broken biscuits and crisps. And I think what you'd be saying to those brands then is like, look at how they've built these associations to build this trust. We're going to need to tell stories about some of this other stuff. So first of all, how are we relevant to the life stage? Let's nick that strategy. But you might also be able to look at, other drivers of trust, right? There is the longevity thing. So how do we do that? Do we tell stories around our exec board who have all been at high street banking organizations and left and joined us? Because you see that time and again in other tech firms where they love shouting about the person they stole from blue chip company, like in the tech industry, right? Like the hardware software industry. Everyone crows about how they've got someone on their board who was instrumental at Google or Apple or Microsoft, right? That's just what you do. Yeah, but part of the reason you do it is because it's a trust builder. When you can't point at longevity because you started last week in a basement in Silicon Valley. So I think you just have to look at the things that drive in the trust for the high street banks and try to your best to tell stories that can replicate that. Because it's not like you're not trustworthy. You just haven't concentrated on telling those stories.
And I think we'll see more and more of these challenger banks starting to move into, this is where they're moving into the brand play. This is where they're moving into what are the associations within the category that we need to own. Let's call it trust if it's life stages. How do we do, life stages or being with people in a way that is differentiated and distinctive from all the other banks? And so that's where you start to use the tracking and the insights, is to say, we know that trust is really important. Let's say life stages are really important, or being along the journey is really important. Okay, great. How are we doing that in a distinctive way that's relevant to our brands, that is differentiated from our competitors? And those are the stories that you tell, and tell those stories consistently and creatively and consistently over time. And I think there's another piece we're starting to see now, is more and more proof points around creative consistency and hammering the same messages home over and over and over and over again. That's what drives longer term brand building. That's what's going to drive future proof businesses. And this is the really exciting move that we're starting to see. Whether you're a challenger, whether you're established, it's know what stories to tell them really well, and for the right group that's relevant to who your consumers, or what your brand really stands for.
Yeah, in the episode I did with Nick Asbury, who's a guy who wrote a book called The Road to Hell. It's about the sort of scourge of purpose, brands with a purpose, right? And how he thinks it's just a massive red herring. And I completely agree with him. We ended up talking about how part of the reason all brands went down the purpose route is because marketers get bored of saying the same thing over and over and over and over again, even though the data people in our industry, yourself included, know that that's what works. And actually you have to consistently reinvent ways to keep the audience interested in the same few stories over time. Brands do want to do that, but marketers don't. Marketers want to put their stamp on things and do something new and different. And we even mentioned, like Fairy Liquid I've ran a couple of identical ads from 50 years ago where they just remade them with new actors. And it's genius, because it is what works. And I think we're in a situation now where you're right, it's really exciting actually. Every brand has the ability to do proper brand building at its fingertips now, as opposed to it being the preserve of only the rich brands. And there's so much ground to make up there. And I think we'll see, if I was in a big portfolio business, I'd start to be a bit more scared of these startups, because they have better weapons at their disposal now, and they can really start to eat proper market share. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens in that space.
As our friend, advisor, and investor Mark Ritson says, he goes, when you as a marketer start to get bored of your advertising or have an urge to change it, it's that point where it's only just starting to cut through. And so take your hands off it. Don't try to change it. When you're starting to get bored, your consumer's only just starting to understand it. I mean, that's tricky, but you've got to track. You can track the impact of that over time. And if it's working over time, don't touch it. Don't get bored. You're going to get bored first. If you're the marketer, you're going to get bored of your advertising first, but the consumer is only just starting to hear and resonate with those messaging. So I really like that as a summary and as a lesson.
Yeah, that's a really nice little takeout from the end of it. And really points of why good brand tracking is important as well, because they're slower metrics to move and they take consistency in order to move them. So I think it's a nice note to end on. You also did talk a little bit about doing that with some personality and making that really consistent as well. One of my favorite brands is Compare the Market. With the Meerkat. Because they can do meerkats for anything. And they've done the life stage thing as well that the banks have done. And, you're hard pushed to think of another comparison site. There's the Opera Singer one but I hate that guy. It's amazing. They've built a brand that's essentially just a steroid spreadsheet, just compares prices from different things. But they've built a really big, powerful brand out there. I think part of the reason is, good brand strategy, really being known for something, but also just personality and tell the same stories. It's always just, you get a cheaper price, you get a free thing. It's just the same every single time, but with personality and consistency. And
personality is another one of these key pillars. We didn't have time to get too deep into personality, but that's absolutely true. It's telling the stories that lined up in a way that is unique or differentiated or distinctive or whatever term you want to use, but it's be different, do it consistent with personality. Those are really fueling, at the end of the day, fueling business growth. And that's the job that, that marketing needs to do, is always driving business growth. And if we can continue to tie marketing and brand building activity to business growth in a common language that helps non-marketers and non-advertisers get why brand and marketing and advertising is important, then we're going to have a much more creative world, better businesses around for a longer term, more challenges being successful past the initial ramp. And I think it's a really exciting time that's coming up.
Me too. Great note to end. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. Listeners, watchers, do check out Tracksuit. It's a brilliant tool and I thoroughly recommend it. And Matt, I'm sure I'll have you on again at some point. We can see an update in a while's time. But in the meantime, best of luck with everything. I'll speak to you soon, mate.
Brilliant. See you soon. Thank you.
Take care.
And the masters of credibility.